Sicily's profound significance in the Mediterranean was dictated by its geography, a nexus positioned centrally between the major landmasses of Europe and Africa and the maritime routes connecting east and west. Its fertile plains and access to maritime trade made it an irresistible prize for successive civilizations seeking regional dominance. The island's history begins with the Phoenician settlement on its western coast, where colonies like Motia provided crucial staging posts for their extensive trading network that spanned the entire Mediterranean basin. These early settlements leveraged the island's location to facilitate commerce between the Levant and the western Mediterranean. A greater transformation occurred with the arrival of the Greeks, who initiated an intense period of colonization from the 8th century BCE. Cities such as Syracuse, Selinus, and Agrigento became powerful, self-governing city-states, replicating the political and cultural structures of the Greek mainland. This colonization injected the island with Hellenic culture, architecture, and political thought, making Sicily, or Magna Graecia, a center of intellectual and military power comparable to Greece itself. The resources and strategic ports of the island led to centuries of conflict between the Greek settlements and the Carthaginian successors to the Phoenicians, with control over the critical straits being a perpetual objective. The inevitable prize of Sicily then drew the attention of the emerging power in the west, Rome. The First Punic War, 264–241 BCE, was fought primarily over the island, marking the first major clash between Rome and Carthage. Rome's ultimate victory secured Sicily as its first overseas province, a status that drastically redefined the island's economic purpose. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. Under Roman administration, Sicily became the empire's vital grain basket, serving as the foundational source of grain, annona, necessary to feed the burgeoning population of Rome and the Italian peninsula. The agricultural output sustained Roman hegemony and transformed the landscape into vast centralized estates, latifundia. Control of the island ensured the stability of the Roman food supply and provided a crucial naval base for projecting power across the southern Mediterranean. This extended period, from Phoenician trade to Roman agriculture, established a consistent pattern. Any power aspiring to control the Mediterranean's flow of resources and communication had to first secure Sicily. The island's enduring destiny was thus cast as a permanent crucible, a nexus where cultures were forged and imperial ambitions were tested. The Emperor Justinian I successfully recovered Sicily for the Eastern Roman Empire during his ambitious campaigns to restore the whole of the former Western Empire in the 6th century. Following the Gothic Wars, the island was integrated into the imperial structure, governed from Constantinople. As the Byzantine Empire contracted under increasing pressure from Sasanian Persians and later the Islamic caliphates, Sicily transitioned from a recovered territory to a crucial frontier post. Its strategic importance reached a zenith in the 7th century when, facing the relentless southward expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate, the imperial government reorganized its periphery. To address the immediate threats, Sicily was formally established as a theme, the primary administrative and military unit of the later Byzantine state. This reorganization placed civil and military authority under a single official, the strategos, who commanded the local fleet and army. The strategos of Sicily wielded considerable influence, reflecting the island's critical role in guarding the central Mediterranean, essentially acting as the shield for the rest of Byzantine Italy. The administration was predominantly Greek-speaking, and the prevailing religious adherence was to the Orthodox Church, though Latin traditions persisted. The island's security was perpetually challenged by the burgeoning Arab naval power. Beginning in the late 7th century, raiding parties from Ifriqiya, modern Tunisia, became a constant menace, targeting coastal settlements and weakening imperial control. These sporadic raids evolved into a systematic threat with the rise of the Aghlabid dynasty in North Africa. The catalyst for the final, sustained invasion was an internal rebellion led by the strategos Euphemius in 827 CE, who, seeking Aghlabid assistance against Constantinople, inadvertently opened the door for a permanent foothold. The ensuing Arab invasion, commencing with the landing at Mazzara del Vallo, initiated a long and arduous struggle. For the next 7 decades, the Byzantines fought fiercely to retain their grip. Key cities fell methodically. Palermo was besieged and captured in 831 CE, becoming the future capital for the invaders. The Eastern Roman forces concentrated their defense in the eastern part of the island, notably around Syracuse and Messina. This relentless pressure defined Sicily as a frontier province where military necessity dictated social life. The constant need for defense and the slow erosion of imperial authority paved the way for a new power structure entirely divorced from both Roman and Byzantine precedent. The gradual Byzantine retreat marked the beginning of their long twilight in the western Mediterranean. The Arab-Islamic period transformed Sicily into a wealthy and culturally advanced emirate that lasted approximately 2 centuries. The island, renamed Sicilia, evolved from a battleground into a vibrant center integrated into the global Islamic trade network. This era is characterized by monumental agricultural innovation. New irrigation techniques, primarily drawing on North African expertise, were introduced and perfected, fundamentally altering the island's productivity. Water-lifting devices and complex canal systems supported cash crops previously unknown or uncultivated extensively in the region, such as citrus fruits, oranges and lemons, sugarcane, cotton, and date palms. This diversification generated significant export revenue and supported a much larger population than had previously existed. The capital, Palermo, became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the Mediterranean. Described by travelers as a city of over 300 mosques, it functioned as a flourishing intellectual center. Scholars and poets from across the Dar al-Islam were drawn to the island, contributing to advancements in mathematics, medicine, and geography. The royal court became a hub for the transmission of knowledge, where Arabic learning intersected with surviving Greek and Latin traditions. This dynamic synthesis fostered a tolerant and prosperous society. The administration of the emirate was distinctively pluralistic. The population was composed of 3 main religious and linguistic groups: Muslims, the ruling elite and majority population, Greek Christians, primarily Orthodox residents of the East, and Latin Christians, mostly concentrated in the West. While the ruling structure was firmly Islamic, these communities, known as dhimmis, were permitted to practice their faiths and govern themselves under their own laws in exchange for paying the jizya tax. This unique blend created a high degree of cultural syncretism, where artistic and architectural styles merged, setting a complex foundation for the subsequent Norman kingdom. This 200-year period of prosperity, characterized by a sophisticated urban economy and a high tolerance for religious diversity, cemented the island's reputation as a jewel of the Mediterranean. The internal political fragmentation of the later emirate, however, ultimately left it vulnerable to external forces. The emergence of the Normans in southern Italy began not as a planned invasion, but as a gradual influx of adventurous individuals from northern France, primarily seeking wealth and opportunity outside the limited patrimonies of Normandy. These men were characterized by their martial prowess and their readiness to serve as professional soldiers. The initial migration, starting around the first decades of the 11th century, often involved pilgrims returning from Jerusalem or knights seeking penance or adventure. Many were drawn south by the fractured political landscape of the Italian peninsula, which offered lucrative service to competing local powers. Southern Italy at this time was a patchwork of Lombard principalities like Capua and Salerno, Byzantine territories, Apulia and Calabria, and coastal city-states. This chronic state of regional conflict created a high demand for skilled mercenaries. The Normans quickly established a formidable reputation for military effectiveness. They initially served as hired muscle for both Lombard princes and Byzantine catapans, exploiting the rivalries between these factions to advance their own interests. Their success allowed them to demand increasingly substantial payment, often in the form of land and titles rather than mere coin. Central to this burgeoning Norman presence was the Hauteville family, stemming from a relatively minor noble, Tancred of Hauteville, who resided near Coutances in Normandy. 10 of Tancred's sons, including William Ironarm, Drogo, Humphrey, Robert Guiscard, and Roger, left home over a period of decades. Their arrival galvanized the Norman community in the south. William Ironarm and his brothers were instrumental in securing early territorial gains. Following the Battle of Cannae in 1041, where they decisively defeated the Byzantine army, they effectively seized control of much of Apulia. The Normans rapidly consolidated their power, transforming their mercenary wages into inherited mainland lordships. This political evolution saw the establishment of the county of Apulia. By 1059, the brothers had substantially increased their holdings, and formal recognition was sought from the papacy. The Papal Alliance, formalized at Melfi, saw Robert Guiscard, the most ambitious and politically shrewd of the brothers, invested as Duke of Apulia and Calabria. This decisive step legitimized the Normans' violent acquisitions and provided the legal framework for their future territorial expansion into all of southern Italy. The final push for the island of Sicily, though conceived later, was a logical extension of the mainland base the Hautevilles had systematically built. The full-scale Norman effort to secure Sicily was spearheaded by Roger I, the youngest and politically astute son of Tancred of Hauteville, while his elder brother, Robert Guiscard, focused on consolidating the mainland duchy of Apulia and Calabria. Roger was tasked with the daunting and protracted campaign against the island's Islamic rulers. The conquest was not a single swift military action but an arduous struggle that spanned nearly 3 decades, beginning in 1061 CE. Roger understood that a permanent acquisition of the island required the systematic reduction of heavily fortified Muslim cities and strategic ports. The initial foothold was secured swiftly in the northeastern corner. In 1061, with a relatively small force, Roger crossed the Strait of Messina and took the city of Messina, which provided a vital base for sustained operations. However, the island's defense was deeply entrenched. The ruling emirate was politically fragmented, with various local sheikhs and factions often warring among themselves, yet capable of mounting fierce resistance when unified against the Norman threat. Roger masterfully exploited these internal divisions, frequently playing one Muslim faction against another to secure temporary alliances or non-aggression pacts. The campaign proceeded through a slow, methodical siege warfare. Key cities became the focus of multi-year endeavors. The strategically important city of Palermo, the island's capital and largest metropolis, proved to be the greatest obstacle. The siege of Palermo began in 1071 and dragged on until 1072. Roger I, supported by Robert Guiscard, employed innovative tactics, blockading the harbours and surrounding the fortifications until the inhabitants were forced to negotiate surrender. The city's fall was a decisive psychological and military victory, fundamentally breaking the back of centralized Islamic resistance. Following Palermo, the conquest moved to the south and east. Cities like Syracuse and Agrigento required subsequent prolonged campaigns. The total conquest was not formally completed until 1091 with the capture of Noto. This protracted process demonstrated Roger I's remarkable military genius and his capacity for perseverance. His strategy relied less on massive battles and more on strategic raids, political maneuvering, the careful management of his limited manpower, and the integration of mercenary forces. By the end of the campaign, Roger I had transitioned from a mere feudal lord to the Count of Sicily, establishing a firm administrative foundation for future Norman royal power. While Roger focused his energies on the slow conquest of the island, His older brother, Robert Guiscard, dedicated himself to the full consolidation of the mainland. Guiscard, whose nickname translates roughly to the Cunning, possessed the political foresight and military might necessary to establish a centralized dominion from the various, often rebellious, Norman holdings. His objective was the systematic subjugation of the remaining independent Lombard principalities and the expulsion of the Byzantines from southern Italy entirely. Guiscard's campaigns culminated in the capture of the crucial Byzantine administrative centre of Bari in 1071, effectively ending Eastern Roman presence in the peninsula after centuries of rule. He also subdued the key Lombard centres of Salerno and Benevento. Through these actions, he finalized the structure of the Duchy of Apulia and Calabria, an entity forged through relentless warfare and diplomatic manipulation. His success was formally recognized by the papacy, a powerful legitimizing factor that simultaneously bound the Norman state to the Holy See as a feudal vassal. The political dynamic between the two Hauteville brothers was one of interdependence and distinct, separate authority. Robert Guiscard, as the recognized duke, was the senior partner, holding suzerainty over the mainland. Roger I, as the Count of Sicily, held the island as a possession, ultimately owing feudal allegiance to his brother. However, due to the difficulty and duration of the Sicilian conquest, which Guiscard helped fund and support with troops, Roger was granted extraordinary autonomy. The island and the mainland were thus governed as distinct entities, each with its own internal administrative structure, but they were inextricably linked by the family ties of the Hauteville dynasty. This arrangement created two different styles of Norman rule: a relatively stable, centralized military duchy on the mainland, perpetually fighting to suppress baronial revolt, and on the island, a newly established county where Roger I was able to build a cohesive administration from the ground up, integrating the existing Greek and Arab populations into his power structure. Robert Guiscard's powerful dominion on the mainland provided the necessary financial and military stability that allowed Roger I, the younger brother, the freedom to complete the island conquest, setting the stage for their eventual union under a single royal crown. Guiscard's later exploits included campaigns against the Byzantine Empire in the Balkans, demonstrating the immense military ambition that characterized his rule. The ambition of Roger II was the driving force behind the unification of all Norman-held territories in southern Italy and Sicily into a single cohesive political state. Inheriting the secure and well-administered Sicilian domains from his father, Roger I, he recognized that the mainland holdings, the turbulent Duchy of Apulia and Calabria, represented both a vulnerability and an opportunity. His cousins, the descendants of Robert Guiscard, governed these mainland regions with limited centralized control, constantly battling rebellious barons. The critical turning point came in 1127 with the death of his cousin William II, Duke of Apulia, who died without a direct male heir. Roger II immediately asserted his hereditary claim to the duchy. This claim was met with fierce resistance from the mainland nobility, who were accustomed to a degree of autonomy that Roger II's strong centralized rule from Sicily threatened to extinguish. The ensuing struggle was marked less by large-scale open warfare and more by crucial political maneuvering and calculated military intervention. Roger II's strategy was systematic. He employed a combination of diplomatic promises, outright bribery, and targeted sieges against recalcitrant barons. He leveraged the vast financial resources and the existing sophisticated administrative structure of the County of Sicily to fund his campaigns and maintain loyalty. The nobility in mainland centres like Naples and Capua attempted to rally behind papal opposition, sensing that a unified Norman state would limit their feudal privileges. Despite this concerted opposition, Roger II's political skill allowed him to patiently erode resistance. He understood that legitimacy was as vital as military force. By 1130, he had successfully welded the disparate Norman territories into a single functional unit. The island, the Duchy of Apulia, the Duchy of Calabria, and the strategic cities of the Capuan region were all brought under his direct suzerainty. This unification of the southern Italian peninsula was a profound transformation. It created a state that possessed not only immense wealth and agricultural resources, but also a strategic naval position, capable of projecting power into both the Byzantine East and the Islamic Maghreb. This act established the preconditions for his next great step, the assumption of a royal title, signifying the permanent establishment of a major new monarchy in the heart of the Mediterranean. The definitive political achievement of Roger II was the elevation of his consolidated domains to the status of a recognized kingdom. This decisive moment occurred on Christmas Day, 1130, in Palermo, the traditional seat of power on the island. The coronation marked the formal shift from a collection of feudal territories to a centralized monarchy, profoundly altering the political map of the Mediterranean. Roger II brilliantly leveraged the ongoing papal schism to achieve this royal title. Following the death of Pope Honorius II, two rival claimants emerged for the papacy, Innocent II and Anacletus II. Recognizing the strategic opportunity, Roger II offered his decisive support to Anacletus II, who in turn granted Roger the coveted title of King of Sicily, Apulia, and Calabria. This transaction was a masterstroke, providing immediate and necessary legitimacy to Roger's newly unified state, even though the designation was initially considered illicit by the rival papal and imperial factions. The coronation ceremony itself was strategically orchestrated to blend Byzantine, Islamic, and Western influences, underscoring the cosmopolitan nature of the new realm. Roger was anointed with oils and crowned, adopting the imperial Byzantine tradition of divine kingship. He was not merely a feudal lord, but a sovereign ruling by the grace of God. His subsequent coin issues and charters reflected this new authority, reinforcing the idea of a cohesive and permanent state. The establishment of the kingdom immediately drew the attention of the major powers. The Holy Roman Emperor, Lothair III, and the legitimate Pope, Innocent II, refused to acknowledge the new status and launched repeated military campaigns against Roger II. The ensuing decade was a period of intense conflict, during which Roger II defended his royal status with military effectiveness and diplomatic resilience. Crucially, even after Anacletus II died and Innocent II was recognized as the sole pope, Roger II compelled the papacy to ratify his royal title. In 1139, the Treaty of Mignano secured papal recognition, which was fundamental to the kingdom's long-term survival. Although the Byzantine Empire continued to view Roger II as a usurper of former imperial lands, his firm establishment of the kingdom ensured that his state, headquartered in Palermo, was a new, powerful force in the Mediterranean geopolitical sphere. Roger II's reign ushered in a golden age of intellectual and governmental achievement, distinguished by a unique synthesis of cultures in his court. This administrative success rested on the Royal Diwan, Arabic Diwan, a sophisticated central bureaucracy inherited and adapted from the previous Islamic administration. The Diwan was responsible for finances, customs, justice, and the systematic recording of royal acts and property, establishing a level of state centralization unmatched in most of contemporary Europe. The administrative stability was underpinned by the trilingual chancellery, a unique feature of the Norman court. Official documents were frequently produced in three distinct languages: Latin for interactions with the papacy and Western European powers, Greek for the administration of the mainland and the Orthodox population, and Arabic for fiscal documents, interaction with the Muslim population, and for tapping into the existing administrative framework on the island. This linguistic fluidity ensured that the diverse communities felt represented and understood by the centralized government. Roger II consciously cultivated a cosmopolitan bureaucracy, recruiting the most competent officials regardless of their ethnic or religious background. Muslim scholars and administrators, such as the renowned geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi, served alongside Greek Orthodox Christians and Latin Westerners. This meritocratic approach ensured the government retained high levels of efficiency and expertise. These officials were often trained at the royal court, fostering a shared culture of loyalty to the sovereign rather than to any specific feudal or religious faction. The apex of this cultural and scholarly output is the Kitab Rujar, the Book of Roger, a monumental work of world geography completed by al-Idrisi in 1154. This text synthesized classical Greek, Roman, and medieval Arabic geographical knowledge, accompanied by an intricate silver planisphere and 70 detailed maps. The Kitab Rujar was a comprehensive mapping of the known world, showcasing the court's commitment to empirical knowledge and scientific inquiry. Furthermore, Roger II's court became a patron of philosophical discourse and artistic production, blending Byzantine mosaics, Islamic wood carvings, and Romanesque architectural forms, creating a distinctive Norman Sicilian style that reflected the extraordinary cultural fusion achieved during his tenure. The reign of William I, the second king of Sicily and son of Roger II, was immediately troubled by an intense divergence between his effective governance and his historical portrayal. He earned the epithet the Bad primarily due to the severe bias of contemporary Latin chroniclers, notably Hugo Falcandus, who resented the king's reliance on non-feudal officials and his tendency to reside in Palermo, away from the rebellious mainland. This narrative of cruelty often overshadowed his actual political acumen in maintaining his father's centralized state. William I's persistent internal revolts almost from the moment he ascended the throne, the mainland barons of Apulia and Calabria, resentful of the monarchy's highly centralized control established by Roger II, repeatedly rose in insurrection, often supported by Pope Adrian IV and the Byzantine Emperor Manuel I Komnenos. The king responded with swift and brutal efficiency, systematically dismantling the fortifications of rebellious nobles and confiscating their lands, a policy necessary to preserve the royal authority. Externally, the reign was dominated by intense naval wars. The kingdom's powerful fleet, a legacy of Roger II, was employed in major conflicts against the two principal Mediterranean rivals. A fierce conflict with the Byzantine Empire erupted, resulting in the successful defense of southern Italian territory. More significantly, William I a major setback in his North African campaign. The Sicilian kingdom had established a brief coastal empire stretching from Tripoli to Tunis. However, this territory proved difficult to hold. Pressured by local resistance and the rise of the Almohad Caliphate, the Sicilian garrisons were gradually overwhelmed. By 1160, the last of these North African holdings was lost, marking a strategic retreat from the African continent and refocusing the kingdom's resources entirely on the defense of the peninsula and the island. Despite these external losses, William I secured a vital diplomatic victory. In 1156, the Treaty of Benevento was signed with Pope Adrian IV. This agreement ended the papal hostility, secured recognition of the kingdom's sovereignty, and reaffirmed the monarch's status. This resolution allowed William to redirect his focus towards internal consolidation, ensuring that the elaborate administrative apparatus, the Diwan, continued to function efficiently and maintain the kingdom's treasury despite the constant warfare. His actions, while earning him the contempt of the feudal elite, ultimately preserved the unity and structure of the Sicilian monarchy. The reign of William II, who came to the throne as a minor, represents the final period of prosperity and architectural splendor for the legitimate male line of the Hauteville dynasty. Unlike his father, William I, he was posthumously granted the title the Good, reflecting a period of relative internal peace and the cessation of the major baronial revolts that had plagued the previous two reigns. He largely governed through highly competent royal ministers, who preserved the centralized bureaucracy established by his grandfather, Roger II. William II became renowned for his lavish patronage of monumental works. The most celebrated example is the Cathedral of Monreale, founded in 1174. This vast project, a synthesis of Byzantine, Islamic, and Romanesque styles, was adorned with glittering gold mosaics covering thousands of square feet. It was conceived not merely as a place of worship, but as a conscious assertion of royal power and wealth, reflecting the cultural tolerance and administrative stability of the kingdom at its zenith. Other contemporary projects further showcased the court's commitment to the Norman Sicilian artistic tradition. In foreign affairs, the young king pursued an ambitious, though ultimately failed, foreign policy. He focused his considerable naval power on two main theatres, the Holy Land and the Balkans. In the East, William II actively sought to intervene in the complex politics of the Crusader states, demonstrating the kingdom's role as a major European player. His most aggressive action was directed against the Byzantine Empire, aiming to reclaim portions of the Balkans. In 1185, a large Sicilian fleet captured Thessalonica, the second city of the Byzantine Empire, a severe blow to Constantinople. However, the subsequent invasion force was repelled, and the territories were swiftly lost. Despite the stability and cultural richness within his borders, William II's reign contained the road to Armageddon for the dynasty. He died without a direct male heir in 1189. To ensure a peaceful succession, he had arranged the marriage of his aunt, Constance of Hauteville, to Henry VI, the heir to the Holy Roman Empire. While intended as a great diplomatic alliance, this political calculation effectively placed the entire kingdom into the hands of the German Hohenstaufen dynasty, terminating the Norman line's direct rule and setting the stage for future conflicts. The most consequential political transaction for the future of the Norman Kingdom of Sicily was the pivotal marriage of Constance of Hauteville to Henry VI, son of Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. Constance was the posthumous daughter of Roger II and the only surviving legitimate direct heir of the Hauteville royal line following the death of her nephew William II. The marriage, formalized in Milan in 1186, was designed by William II to ensure dynastic continuity and to secure a powerful military alliance against Byzantine and other geopolitical threats. However, the political implications were profound and immediately destabilizing. By uniting Constance, the rightful heiress to the rich southern kingdom, with Henry VI, the heir to the Holy Roman Empire, the marriage promised to consolidate German and Sicilian territories under a single Hohenstaufen crown. This proposed union was viewed with profound alarm by the papacy, which feared being encircled by the formidable imperial power, effectively losing its political maneuverability and temporal independence. The papacy had historically relied on the Norman kingdom as a strategic counterweight to the German emperors. When William II died without an immediate successor in 1189, the Norman and Italian nobility fiercely resisted the German claim. They feared the loss of their local customs, their privileged position, and the highly successful bureaucratic system created by the Hautevilles. This fear stemmed from the very real prospect of Sicily being treated not as an independent kingdom, but as a provincial appendage of the vast, decentralized German Empire. The nobility quickly rallied around Tancred of Lecce, an illegitimate grandson of Roger II, who was crowned king in a move to safeguard national independence. The subsequent conflict would define the next decade, transforming Constance's marriage from an act of high diplomacy into the seed of an imperial conquest. Though Constance was the legitimate heiress, the physical control of the kingdom passed only after a bloody struggle, funded and led by her husband. The marriage effectively sold the kingdom's future, as the Hohenstaufen dynasty, once victorious, would integrate the wealth and administration of Sicily into their broader imperial ambitions. The vacuum created by the death of William II and the threat of German control immediately triggered an interregnum defined by native resistance. The nobility and ministers who sought to preserve Sicilian independence rallied behind Tancred of Lecce, an illegitimate grandson of Roger II. Tancred was crowned king, representing a deliberate act of defiance against the Hohenstaufen claim represented by Constance and Henry VI. His reign was a continuous struggle to consolidate authority and fend off the encroaching imperial power, particularly on the vulnerable mainland territories. The claimant to the throne, Henry VI, leveraged his position as Holy Roman Emperor to orchestrate a systematic conquest of the kingdom. His first invasion attempt in 1191 failed, largely due to disease and the effective resistance organized by Tancred's forces. However, following Tancred's premature death in 1194 and the subsequent succession of his young son William III, the opportunity arose for a decisive imperial intervention. Henry VI launched his second, better-funded and overwhelming military campaign in 1194. This time, the German army rapidly swept across the mainland and crossed into Sicily. Key cities, facing superior forces and sensing the inevitability of the conquest, surrendered, often in exchange for favorable terms. The conquest of the kingdom culminated with the capture of Palermo. The last vestiges of the Norman dynasty were brutally extinguished. The young William III was quickly deposed and arrested, formally ending the Hauteville line's political role. The conquest was followed by the establishment of an iron grip marked by extreme violence and repression. Henry VI's rule was defined by a reign of terror aimed at eliminating all sources of resistance. He arrested and executed large numbers of the Norman and Italian nobility who had supported Tancred. The emperor's actions included the notorious Christmas Day arrests in Palermo, where he publicly tortured and executed many high-ranking officials and nobles, consolidating his authority through fear. This brutal end of Norman rule effectively transformed the kingdom from a relatively independent, multicultural monarchy into a subordinate territory of the vast Hohenstaufen Empire. Henry VI's systematic repression paved the way for German control and the complete overhaul of the Sicilian administrative structure. The conquest of the Sicilian kingdom by Emperor Henry VI was immediately followed by a period of ruthless consolidation designed to firmly implant German control and ensure the submission of the native nobility. Henry VI viewed the kingdom not as a crown to be merged, but as a rich source of revenue and a strategic base for imperial operations, demanding absolute obedience. The central component of his strategy was a terrifying program of repression aimed at the extinction of opposition. He systematically targeted the Norman aristocracy and the high-ranking royal officials who had supported the rival king, Tancred of Lecce. Methods included mass arrests, public show trials, imprisonment, and brutal executions. This campaign of state terror effectively silenced the powerful feudal families who had previously challenged the centralized authority of the Norman kings. By physically removing or crippling the leadership of the resistance, Henry established an immediate and unquestionable authority. Furthermore, Henry VI initiated a comprehensive program for the confiscation of lands. The vast estates and titles of the executed or exiled Norman nobles were seized by the crown. These immense holdings were then often redistributed to his loyal German administrators and military commanders, fundamentally altering the social and feudal landscape of the South. This created a new foreign elite directly loyal to the Hohenstaufen Emperor, effectively displacing the established indigenous power structure. To maintain his grip, the emperor established a highly centralized military authority in the south. German garrisons were installed in strategic fortresses across the mainland and the island. These military districts were placed under the command of German ministeriales, unfree officials loyal only to the emperor, bypassing the traditional feudal structures. This layer of loyal, non-native administrators and military personnel was essential for collecting revenue and ensuring the rapid suppression of any local unrest, circumventing the risks inherent in relying on the local baronial class. Henry's death in 1197 was sudden, but his methods had effectively severed the Norman dynastic link and laid the institutional foundation for the later, equally centralized, rule of his son, Frederick II. His brief but brutal reign of terror ensured that the Hohenstaufen claim was secured by iron grip. The tumultuous early life of Frederick II, often referred to as the Puer Apuliae, child of Apulia, began under the shadow of political chaos and dynastic instability. Born in 1194, he was the only son of the Hohenstaufen Emperor Henry VI and the Norman heiress Constance. His childhood became exceptionally perilous following the premature deaths of both his parents in quick succession. Henry VI died in 1197, followed by Constance in 1198. Frederick inherited the Kingdom of Sicily as an infant, instantly becoming a key figure in the struggle between the papacy and the empire. Constance, recognizing the immense difficulty of ruling a vast, volatile kingdom while simultaneously pursuing the imperial crown, took a critical step before her death. She named Pope Innocent III as Frederick's guardian and regent for the Sicilian kingdom. This act, while surrendering a degree of sovereignty, was a calculated move to protect her son from rival German claimants and the ambitious local barons who immediately sought to reassert their independence. As a papal ward, Frederick's security was nominally guaranteed by the Church, but his upbringing was far from stable. Frederick's early life was spent in Palermo, the former Norman capital, where he experienced a highly unique upbringing amidst a vibrant confluence of cultures. The city was still home to thriving Greek, Muslim, and Latin communities. The young king was exposed to these diverse cultures and languages, Arabic, Greek, and Latin, which contributed significantly to his later intellectual breadth and administrative genius. However, during the Regency, the central royal authority effectively collapsed. Palermo became a lawless, neglected environment. The royal palace was often ignored, and the young Frederick grew up with minimal supervision, frequently interacting with the common people and the varied inhabitants of the marketplace. By the time Frederick was old enough to assume personal rule, he inherited a kingdom in disarray. The German administrators were expelled, the feudal barons had seized royal assets, and the Saracen population in the interior was actively rebelling. His turbulent, self-guided formation in Palermo, away from traditional court restraints, ultimately equipped him with the deep understanding of the region's complexity and the political cunning necessary to later restore and redefine the highly centralized state. Frederick II, eventually hailed as Stupa Mundi, Wonder of the World, began his independent rule by facing the daunting task of reclaiming his Sicilian kingdom from the grasp of powerful, self-interested barons and turbulent factions. His initial focus was not on the German crown, but on re-establishing the shattered royal prerogative in Palermo. By 1212, however, the political situation in the Holy Roman Empire offered him a chance to pursue his birthright against the rival claimant, Otto IV. Frederick's rise to power as emperor was a stunning political gamble. Supported by Pope Innocent III, his former guardian, and French King Philip II, he embarked on a bold, successful campaign to claim the Holy Roman Empire. He crossed the Alps with a small retinue, relying on diplomacy and alliances with key German princes. The decisive military confrontation occurred in 1214 at the Battle of Bouvines, where his allies effectively defeated Otto IV, securing Frederick's title as the future emperor. He was crowned in Rome in 1220. Despite becoming the ruler of an immense territory stretching from the North Sea to Sicily, Frederick II maintained an enduring focus on the Kingdom of Sicily as the foundational element of his vast domains. He correctly identified the kingdom as the heartland and financial engine of his imperial authority. Unlike the largely decentralized feudal structures of Germany, Sicily offered a tradition of centralized governance, abundant agricultural wealth, and sophisticated administrative machinery, all of which translated directly into reliable revenue. He spent the majority of his adult life in the south, viewing the kingdom as his personal inheritance and a laboratory for political innovation. His policy towards Germany was one of calculated delegation, granting significant powers to the German princes in exchange for their loyalty, thus freeing him to concentrate on the Mediterranean. This dual-focus rule defined the era, an emperor who preferred the sunny, culturally diverse court of Palermo over the icy, turbulent courts of Germany. Frederick II's ability to draw consistent, massive revenue from Sicily, including monopolies on essential goods and efficient tax collection, allowed him to finance his constant wars and diplomatic endeavors across the breadth of his vast domains. His tenure represents a unique fusion of imperial power with the resources of the southern monarchy. The most enduring domestic legacy of Frederick II's rule was the promulgation of the Constitutions of Melfi, also known as the Liber Augustalis, in 1231. This masterful legal reform was a groundbreaking political document, representing a fundamental codification of law that superseded many older customary and feudal rights. It was devised to restore and dramatically enhance the centralized structure inherited from the Normans, providing a unified legal framework for the entire kingdom, including both the mainland and the island. The constitutions were distinguished by their highly centralized code, systematically designed to dismantle the remnants of decentralized feudal power. They stripped power from the feudal barons by asserting that all justice and jurisdiction ultimately resided with the sovereign. The right of private warfare, a staple of feudal privilege, was strictly prohibited. Furthermore, the code mandated that justice had to be dispensed by royal officials, diminishing the barons' authority to judge their own vassals and tenants. This established the rule of law under the sovereign and asserted the state's monopoly on judicial authority. The code also targeted the political power of the clergy, another body that had amassed considerable influence during the periods of political weakness. The constitutions imposed restrictions on ecclesiastical courts and limited the clergy's right to acquire land. These measures aimed to ensure that the church, while respected, remained politically subordinate to the secular authority of the monarch. The reforms effectively separated the functions of government from the influence of powerful corporate bodies, consolidating political control in the hands of the king. In a truly modern sense, the constitutions introduced professionalization to the bureaucracy. They mandated rigorous training for judicial officials, required clear documentation of legal proceedings, and set fixed salaries for administrators. This system was supported by a dedicated network of royal governors, justiciari, who oversaw justice and administration in the provinces. By formalizing the legal and administrative apparatus, Frederick II created a secular, bureaucratic state, capable of enforcing its will uniformly across his southern realm, cementing the kingdom as the most centralized monarchy in Europe at that time. The central drama of Frederick II's imperial career was his decades-long dramatic conflict with the papacy. The core of this struggle was Frederick's long-delayed oath to lead a crusade to the Holy Land, a pledge he had repeatedly made and postponed since his coronation. Pope Gregory IX viewed this delay as not only a breach of faith, but also a deliberate attempt by the emperor to solidify his power in Italy, thereby threatening the temporal independence of the Church. The mounting tension culminated in Frederick's excommunication in 1227. This was a severe penalty, publicly branding the powerful emperor as an enemy of the Church. Despite the spiritual condemnation, Frederick defied papal authority and, in 1228, finally launched the Sixth Crusade. He arrived in the Holy Land not as a traditional crusading warrior, but as a skilled diplomat. Frederick II's strategy was unique, representing a sophisticated form of diplomatic crusade. Instead of engaging in massive warfare, he leveraged his deep understanding of Islamic culture and his fluent Arabic, gained from his Palermo upbringing, to open negotiations with the Ayyubid Sultan al-Kamil. The Sultan, dealing with internal dynastic disputes, was receptive to a peaceful settlement. The resulting Treaty of Jaffa in 1229 was an astonishing achievement. Frederick successfully retrieved Jerusalem and a corridor connecting it to the coast, along with Nazareth and Bethlehem, for Christian control. This was accomplished without recourse to massive warfare, bloodshed, or significant military expenditure. The treaty guaranteed a 10-year truce and allowed Muslims to retain control over the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, a concession that was highly pragmatic but infuriated many papal loyalists and Western knights. Frederick then entered Jerusalem and, still under the ban of excommunication, crowned himself King of Jerusalem, using the occasion to assert his imperial authority above clerical sanction. The papacy initially refused to recognize his achievement, even launching a campaign into the Kingdom of Sicily during his absence. Frederick II returned quickly, defeated the papal forces, and eventually forced Pope Gregory IX to lift the excommunication in 1230 with the Treaty of Soprano, temporarily resolving the crisis that had earned him the metaphorical crown of thorns. Frederick II's court, frequently held at his castle in Foggia, became renowned throughout Europe as a place of advanced learning and secular inquiry. The emperor's personal inclination towards science and culture, stemming from his trilingual, multicultural upbringing in Palermo, drove a deliberate policy of patronage of the arts and sciences. He established the University of Naples in 1224, specifically intended to train the highly competent, loyal administrators needed for his centralized bureaucracy, thereby bypassing the existing church-controlled universities. A defining feature of this court environment was the continuous philosophical dialogue with Islamic scholars. Frederick maintained correspondences and hosted envoys from Muslim rulers, including the Sultan of Egypt. These interactions facilitated the transfer of scientific and philosophical texts from the Arab world into Latin Europe, particularly works by Aristotle and major Arabic commentators. The emperor himself commissioned translations and engaged directly in scientific experimentation, including studies in zoology and falconry, demonstrating a pragmatic and empirical approach to knowledge. The court at Foggia also gave rise to the Sicilian school of poetry. This group of court officials and intellectual figures, writing in the Sicilian dialect, is credited with the crucial introduction of poetry to the vernacular. They adapted the courtly love themes, fin amours, of the Provençal troubadours into Italian, innovating forms such as the sonnet. This literary movement marks the earliest known example of a formal literary tradition in a Romance language distinct from Latin, laying the groundwork for later Italian literary giants. Frederick's policies were not without controversy. He faced a constant problem of internal Muslim rebellion on the island. After years of sustained military campaigns, he chose a highly unorthodox and pragmatic solution: the controversial settlement of Muslim loyalists in Lucera on the mainland. Thousands of Sicilian Saracens, skilled archers and farmers, were forcibly relocated to this military colony in Apulia. This move secured the stability of Sicily while providing the emperor with a highly disciplined, non-feudal standing army, loyal only to him, a force that proved invaluable in his subsequent wars against the papacy and the rebellious northern Italian communes. This unique integration of the Sultan's men into the core of his military structure demonstrated Frederick's pragmatic approach to governance, placing effectiveness above religious conformity. Following the death of Frederick II, the Swabian dynasty entered its twilight in the Kingdom of Sicily. The task of defending the Hohenstaufen inheritance against relentless papal opposition fell primarily to Manfred, Frederick II's illegitimate but highly capable son. Manfred demonstrated long, determined resistance, leveraging his father's immense treasury and the loyalty of the Saracen troops settled in Lucera. He quickly seized the regency for his nephew Conradin, and then, upon rumours of Conradin's death, claimed the crown for himself, ruling the kingdom effectively from 1258. Manfred's authority faced the sustained and relentless papal hostility. The papacy viewed the continuation of Hohenstaufen rule in southern Italy as an existential threat, fearing the Stupamundi's successors would similarly encroach upon the papal states. Successive popes declared the kingdom a papal fief and repeatedly excommunicated Manfred, attempting to delegitimize his rule and incite rebellion. The papacy was determined to replace the powerful Swabian line with a less threatening dynasty that would recognize papal suzerainty. After years of political maneuvering and failed attempts to launch a papal crusade with minor European princes, the Pope resorted to a final decisive action, the call to France. In a move to permanently extinguish the Hohenstaufen presence, Pope Urban IV formally offered the crown of the Kingdom of Sicily to a powerful and capable foreign contender, Charles of Anjou. Charles was the ambitious younger brother of King Louis IX of France and the Count of Provence. This offering transformed the conflict from a domestic Italian dynastic dispute into a major European invasion. Charles accepted the offer, providing the papacy with a formidable military champion. In return, he agreed to become a vassal of the Papal See and pay substantial tribute, ensuring the future Angevin kingdom would be politically subservient to the Church. This pivotal agreement guaranteed Charles the necessary legitimacy and financial backing to raise a large French army, signaling the inevitable final confrontation between the French forces and the last bastion of Swabian power under Manfred. The decisive foreign intervention against the Hohenstaufen dynasty was orchestrated by Charles of Anjou, the formidable brother of King Louis IX of France. His campaign was explicitly sanctioned by the papacy and financed as a literal papal crusade against the excommunicated Manfred. This papal backing was crucial, lending spiritual and political legitimacy to the military intervention and enabling Charles to raise a large army of French and Provençal knights. Charles's army marched south through Italy in 1266, facing little concerted resistance until they encountered Manfred's forces. The confrontation that decided the fate of the Kingdom of Sicily took place at the Battle of Benevento on the 26th of February 1266. Manfred's army was a diverse force, relying heavily on the loyal German and Saracen troops, alongside Italian contingents. Charles, however, commanded a force renowned for its heavy cavalry discipline and determination. The battle itself was fierce, but ultimately swift. Manfred made the fateful decision to engage the French directly, rather than relying on defensive fortifications. When much of Manfred's Italian feudal contingent defected or retreated early in the fight, his core German and Saracen forces were isolated. Despite the valiant efforts of his remaining troops, Charles of Anjou's French cavalry proved superior. The battle culminated in Manfred's death. Refusing to flee, he plunged into the thick of the fighting and was killed. His body was initially buried under a pile of stones on the battlefield, denying him Christian burial due to his excommunication. The papal banner was now planted firmly over the kingdom. This victory was the French seizure of the crown and the final end of the Hohenstaufen line in Sicily. Although Manfred's young nephew Conradin would later attempt to reclaim the inheritance, the Swabian political presence in southern Italy was irrevocably shattered at Benevento. Charles of Anjou immediately assumed the throne, initiating the brief but consequential Angevin dynasty and transferring the traditional political centre of the kingdom from Palermo to Naples. The arrival of the Angevin dynasty under Charles of Anjou was immediately followed by a wave of administrative mismanagement and deeply resented policies that sowed the seeds of rebellion on the island of Sicily. Having won the kingdom through papal and French backing, Charles viewed the territory primarily as a military and financial platform to launch his wider Mediterranean ambitions, particularly against Constantinople. One of the most immediate and profound failures of the new regime was the implementation of heavy taxation. Charles of Anjou needed vast sums of money to repay the massive debts incurred during his papal crusade and to fund his projected expansionist foreign policy. The efficient but rigorous Hohenstaufen tax structure was not dismantled but intensified, placing an unsupportable burden on the Sicilian populace, which had grown accustomed to the relative stability and wealth of the previous era. New levies and arbitrary seizures eroded the widespread support the Normans and Swabians had cultivated among the commoners. Coupled with the fiscal strain was the pervasive arrogance of the French administration. Charles replaced the long-standing, cosmopolitan and highly trained native bureaucracy, which had previously utilized Greek, Latin and Arabic, with Provençal and French officials. These new administrators were often insensitive to local customs, unfamiliar with the island's unique legal and social structures, and perceived as rapacious foreign invaders. This replacement of local officials with foreigners led to rampant abuses of power and injustice, further alienating the Sicilian nobility and the urban merchant class. The critical decision to relocate the political centre was the third major offence. Charles of Anjou chose to move his royal capital and court from Palermo, the historic administrative and cultural heart of the kingdom for centuries, to Naples. This demotion of Palermo was perceived as a massive insult by the Sicilians. It transformed the island from the strategic nucleus of the realm into a mere provincial possession governed from the mainland. This shift created a deep rift between the Angevin government and the Sicilian population, leading to widespread discontent that required only a catalyst to erupt into full-scale revolt. The widespread discontent with Charles of Anjou's regime reached its explosive climax in an event known as the Sicilian Vespers. This spontaneous and brutal uprising against tyranny commenced on Easter Monday, the 30th of March 1282, outside the Church of the Holy Spirit in Palermo. The revolt was sparked by an isolated incident involving a French sergeant's alleged harassment of a Sicilian woman. The outrage quickly escalated into a violent confrontation between the locals and the French garrison. The initial violence in the churchyard rapidly spiraled into a localized riot, but within hours it transformed into a full-scale national revolt. The cry, "Death to the French," spread like wildfire through the city of Palermo. The infuriated populace, driven by years of heavy taxation and administrative abuses, targeted French individuals and officials indiscriminately. The fury was directed with lethal precision at all persons identified as French, regardless of their status or involvement in the administration. Crucially, the massacre was not confined to the capital. The revolt instantly propagated across the island with astonishing speed. The signal of rebellion, the tolling of the church bells for evening prayers, vespers, was echoed in cities and towns across Sicily. What followed was a brutal massacre of the French population across the island. Within weeks, thousands of French men, women, and children were killed by the Sicilians. The systematic nature of the killing indicated the depth of the hatred that the Angevin administration had engendered. The immediate political consequence was the complete expulsion of Angevin authority from the island. The Sicilian populace, now unified in their resistance, formed a communal government in Palermo and other major cities. They immediately sought external protection and validation for their revolution. Recognizing that Charles of Anjou would launch a devastating counter-invasion, the rebels knew they could not survive alone. This dramatic cosmic uprising thus necessitated a decisive call for foreign intervention, setting the stage for the entry of the Aragonese dynasty into the Mediterranean power struggle. The Vespers were less a war and more a violent political purge that fundamentally severed the connection between the island and the mainland kingdom. The sudden success of the Sicilian Vespers rebellion created an immediate political crisis for the insurgents, who needed a powerful sovereign to defend their revolution against the inevitable Angevin retaliation. The immediate decision by the Sicilian rebels was to appeal to the one monarch who possessed both the naval power and the legitimate dynastic claim to the throne, Pedro III of Aragon. Pedro III was the King of Aragon and Count of Barcelona, making him a major Mediterranean maritime power. Crucially, his connection to the island's former rulers provided the necessary justification for his Aragonese intervention. Pedro III was married to Constance, the daughter of Manfred, the last reigning Swabian king of Sicily. Through his wife, Pedro asserted the claim of the Hohenstaufen inheritance, positioning himself not as a foreign invader, but as the rightful heir restoring the legitimate dynasty, thereby challenging the papacy's previous sanction of the Angevin seizure. At the moment the Vespers erupted, Pedro was already conducting a military campaign in North Africa. He swiftly diverted his fleet to Sicily, landing in Palermo in late August 1282. He was immediately welcomed and proclaimed king by the Sicilian populace. This act directly contradicted the papacy's authority, which had granted the kingdom to Charles of Anjou. The papacy, viewing Pedro as a defiant usurper, quickly excommunicated him and placed his entire realm under interdict. The Aragonese acceptance of the crown was the pivotal moment that transformed the internal revolt into a major international war. Charles of Anjou, who had been preparing for an invasion of the Byzantine Empire, was forced to turn his massive resources toward retaking the lost island. The conflict, known as the War of the Vespers, now involved the papacy, the Kingdom of France, Charles's homeland, and the Kingdom of Aragon, all vying for control of the central Mediterranean. Pedro's quick action had provided the Sicilian rebels with the formidable military shield necessary for their survival. The immediate consequence of the Aragonese intervention was the 20-year period of sustained military engagement known as the War of the Vespers. This long, relentless conflict pitted the combined forces of the Angevin French and the papacy against the Aragonese kingdom and their Sicilian allies. The war was fought primarily across the Straits of Messina, involving both land skirmishes on the mainland and critical naval battles for control of the sea lanes. The war saw several phases of intense fighting and temporary truces. The naval superiority of the Aragonese fleet, commanded by figures like Roger of Loria, proved decisive. The Aragonese repeatedly inflicted crushing defeats on the Angevin navy, effectively guaranteeing the island's defence and preventing Charles of Anjou from launching a successful large-scale invasion. The death of Charles of Anjou in 1285 did little to halt the conflict, as his descendants continued the struggle to reclaim their lost territories under the continued insistence of the papacy. The 2 decades of conflict were marked by the gradual realization that neither side could militarily achieve total victory over the other. The papacy was unable to dislodge the Aragonese, and the Aragonese lacked the resources to conquer the mainland permanently. This stalemate eventually necessitated a diplomatic solution to formalize the division of the south. The war finally culminated in the Treaty of Caltabellotta in 1302. This landmark agreement formally acknowledged the reality established by the war. It recognized Charles of Anjou's control over the mainland territories, which continued to be styled the Kingdom of Naples. Concurrently, it recognized the Aragonese control over the island, which was given the distinctive name of the Kingdom of Trinacria, an ancient name for Sicily. Crucially, the treaty provided that the Aragonese ruler of Sicily, Federico III, would temporarily hold the title as king, but after his death, the island would revert to Angevine control. However, Federico and his successors ignored this reversion clause, ensuring the separation became permanent. This treaty thus ended the long war and cemented the political split of the former Norman Swabian realm into 2 competing kingdoms. The resolution of the War of the Vespers in 1302 led to a new political reality for the island, permanently severing it from the mainland and initiating the era of the Kingdom of Trinacria. This name, derived from the island's ancient tri-cornered shape, emphasized a distinct identity separate from the Angevin-controlled Kingdom of Naples. The separation was cemented by the establishment of the Aragonese Infante Federico III as the island's king. Federico III, a younger son of Pedro III of Aragon, proved to be a highly effective and long-reigning monarch. Although the Treaty of Caltabellotta had stipulated that the island would revert to Angevin control after his death, Federico successfully circumvented this clause. The Sicilian parliament, comprised of the island's nobility and urban representatives, strongly supported his defiance of the treaty terms, asserting their right to choose their own monarch and cementing a separate non-Angevin path for Sicily. This new dynasty, the line of Barcelona, was technically a branch of the ruling family of the Crown of Aragon, yet it provided a native focus for the island. The Aragonese were seen as liberators who respected Sicilian autonomy, particularly in contrast to the heavily extractive and arrogant French administration. The capital remained in Palermo, restoring its political importance, and the administration was restaffed with local nobles and Aragonese supporters, rather than foreign officials from distant realms. The political structure of the Kingdom of Trinacria began to rely heavily on the Sicilian parliament. This institution, which included representatives from the military, the clergy, and the royal cities, gained significant power in financial matters and succession disputes. The Aragonese rulers frequently had to concede privileges and rights to the parliament to secure funds and maintain political stability, a stark contrast to the absolute central authority wielded by the Norman and Swabian monarchs. The establishment of this separate Aragonese kingdom ensured that the historical trajectory of the island was forever divorced from that of Naples. While the mainland focused on European continental politics, the Kingdom of Trinacria became strategically integrated into the emerging Crown of Aragon's Mediterranean network, shifting its economic and political focus towards the Iberian Peninsula and its powerful maritime empire. The integration of Sicily into the Aragonese sphere of influence brought about a significant shift in the island's economic orientation, ushering in the period of Catalan and Aragonese ascendancy. The economic consequences of the new regime were profound, reorienting the island's primary trade networks away from the French and Italian peninsular markets towards the Western Mediterranean. The Crown of Aragon was rapidly expanding its own maritime empire, encompassing the Balearic Islands and Sardinia. Sicily's strategic ports and rich agricultural output, particularly its grain, became increasingly integrated into this wider network. This integration was primarily driven by Catalan merchants and financiers, who established dominant positions in Palermo, Messina, and other key trading centres. These merchants, backed by the political and naval power of Aragon, effectively displaced the Genoese and Pisan merchants, who had previously controlled much of the island's overseas commerce. This shift brought considerable wealth to Catalan merchants and a degree of economic stability to the island, as Sicilian resources found secure and consistent markets within the Aragonese sphere. Sicilian grain was vital for feeding Catalonia and Aragon, while the island became a key transit point for goods moving between the Iberian Peninsula, North Africa, and the eastern Mediterranean. The Aragonese monarchy also encouraged the development of local industries, though the primary benefit flowed back to the ruling power's commercial class. However, this economic dominance meant that Sicily, while stable, began to function more as a dependency that fueled the fortunes of Barcelona and Valencia. While the island benefited from the security of the Aragonese navy, the profits from its exports often flowed out of the local economy. This structure reinforced the political subservience of the island, despite the official designation of a separate kingdom of Trinacria. The rise of the Aragonese commercial class in Sicily established long-lasting familial and business ties that anchored the island politically to the Iberian crowns for centuries to come. The Aragonese period in the Kingdom of Trinacria was marked by a decisive political counter-reaction to the previous imperial governance models. Following the highly centralized Swabian and Angevin periods, which had systematically curtailed feudal authority, the new Aragonese rulers relied heavily on the support of the local aristocracy. This necessity led directly to the re-empowerment of the local Sicilian baronage and a resurgence of decentralized feudalism across the island. The Aragonese monarchs focused more on managing their vast Mediterranean empire and defending against Angevin counterclaims, often lacked the direct resources and attention to maintain the rigorous central control established by Frederick II. To secure loyalty and military assistance, they willingly exchanged royal power for baronial allegiance, granting sweeping baronial privilege. Key royal assets, including castles, large tracts of land, and even entire towns, were transferred from royal domain to the hands of the nobility. This policy cemented the establishment of powerful feudal families on the island, such as the Chiaramonte, Ventimiglia, and Peralta, who governed their territories with increasing autonomy. They exercised judicial rights, levied their own taxes, and maintained private armies, effectively decentralizing the state's political functions. The feudal class became the dominant political and military force, often acting independently of the crown's direct authority. This devolution of power created a perpetual challenge for the crown, leading to decades of internal turmoil, characterized by baronial infighting and frequent civil wars. The nobility frequently formed factions, leveraging their regional strength and influence within the Sicilian parliament to resist royal attempts at taxation or administrative reform. This environment of internal conflict sharply contrasts with the unified, bureaucratic peace of the Norman and early Swabian eras. By prioritizing local power over centralized administration, the Aragonese rulers fundamentally restructured the island's governance, locking Sicily into a feudal pattern that would persist for centuries. The reign of Alfonso V of Aragon, who earned the title the Magnanimous, represents the territorial and political zenith of the Crown of Aragon. His primary ambition was the pursuit of Naples, aiming to permanently undo the division of the south that had persisted since the War of the Vespers and reclaim the historical mainland portion of the old Norman kingdom. Alfonso V inherited the Kingdom of Trinacria, which was already securely anchored in the Aragonese sphere. He leveraged the island's considerable grain wealth and strategic position to fund his expansive foreign policy. His focus shifted decisively towards the Angevin Kingdom of Naples, where dynastic disputes following the death of Queen Joanna II offered a crucial opportunity for intervention. Alfonso V launched a sustained and complex military campaign against the Angevin claimant, René of Anjou. The struggle spanned several years and involved intricate diplomacy, shifting alliances with Italian city-states, and intense siege warfare. The king personally led his forces, demonstrating his military and political dedication to the objective. The effort was costly, but his perseverance paid off. In 1442, Alfonso V successfully conquered the Kingdom of Naples. This victory led to the temporary reuniting of the two crowns of Sicily and Naples under a single Aragonese monarch, an achievement not realized since the days of the Hohenstaufens. He moved his primary court and administrative center to Naples, which became the new capital of his vast Mediterranean empire. While Sicily and Naples remained legally distinct, they were governed by the same sovereign. This achievement showcased the immense power of the united Aragonese realm. Alfonso V controlled a vast maritime domain that spanned from the Pyrenees to Sardinia, Sicily, and now the entire southern Italian peninsula. This geopolitical entity dominated the western Mediterranean, challenging the influence of Venice and the rising Ottoman threat in the east. Although the union was temporary as Alfonso V bequeathed Naples to his illegitimate son Ferrante, while the rest of the crown of Aragon passed to his brother, this period marked the high watermark of Aragonese imperial ambition and cemented the Iberian presence in southern Italy. The history of the medieval Kingdom of Sicily reached its ultimate conclusion with the permanent union orchestrated by Ferdinand II of Aragon. This period marks the complete consolidation of the Spanish crown and the final incorporation of the southern Italian kingdoms into a new dominant imperial entity. Ferdinand II was the heir to the crown of Aragon, which included the island of Sicily, Trinacria. His pivotal action was his marriage to Isabella of Castile in 1469. While the two crowns remained legally separate during their lifetime, this dynastic union effectively merged their immense territories and resources, creating the foundational core of what would become modern Spain. This marriage provided Ferdinand with the necessary power and political capital to complete his ambitions in Italy. The mainland kingdom of Naples, which had separated after Alfonso V's reign, fell under French control following the brief invasion by Charles VIII. Ferdinand II, employing his formidable diplomatic and military skill, engaged in the Italian wars to reclaim the mainland inheritance. The crucial struggle saw Spanish forces, commanded by Gonzalo Fernández de Córdoba, decisively defeat the French in the early 16th century. The result was the final definitive union of the crowns of Sicily and Naples under Ferdinand II. By 1504, Ferdinand was the recognized king of both the island and the mainland. For the first time since the Hohenstaufens, the entire southern Italian peninsula was reunited under a single sovereign. However, this reunion was achieved under a foreign imperial power whose seat of government was now distant Madrid. This geopolitical shift led to the folding of the Sicilian kingdom into the burgeoning Spanish Empire. Sicily and Naples were relegated to the status of viceroyalties, governed by appointed Spanish noblemen. The highly centralized Spanish administration utilized the kingdom's significant resources, particularly the grain from Sicily and the revenue from Naples, to finance its imperial projects and conflicts across Europe and the New World. While the local Sicilian institutions, such as the Parliament, technically survived, their real political power diminished, securing the island's long-term fate as a vital but subordinate part of the new global superpower.